Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hi there. Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Our guest is Susan Omilian. Susan is an attorney, author, and motivational speaker who has helped hundreds of women over the last 40 years reclaim their lives after abuse. In the 70s, she founded a rape crisis center, and in the 80s, represented battered women in divorce proceedings. In the 90s, she's been doing this for a minute. In the 90s, she litigated sex discrimination cases and trained employers about how to stop sexual harassment in the workplace. Susan, it's a pleasure to have you on here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're going to just jump right in. So I stopped in your bio up until the point where you talked about what happened to your niece. Please share that story with us.
So I had done this work about 20 years before October of 1999. When I got a phone call in the middle of the night, which everybody knows phone calls in the middle of the night are not good.
No.
Usually. So it was my sister. She told me that my niece, Maggie, who was at the time a 19-year-old college student at a pretty good school in the Midwest in Michigan, where I grew up. I now live here in Connecticut. And she told me that my niece had been murdered by her ex-boyfriend. And that kind of, it's just shocking. It was kind of like going through my head, how could this happen? How could this happen? I had done this work for 20 years, as I said before this. I had worked with women at all races, ages, socioeconomic, whatever. I understood that anybody could be a victim, particularly of gun violence and violence against women. But for some reason, I had made my family the other, and that I wasn't going to be touched. And I guess we all do that. Although today, almost 20 years later, it's more unfortunately more common that gun violence is part of our lives. But so he killed himself. He killed her and killed himself. He had never physically assaulted Maggie before he killed her. So my niece didn't have that warning sign. There were certainly warning signs around verbal abuse. And one of the key ones was refusing to accept the end of the relationship. She had ended it and he would not leave her alone. And I think, knowing my niece, she was very bright. She was very a problem solver. That he wasn't leaving her alone on this very small campus. And the college seemed to have nothing in place, or she didn't trust that anybody could really solve this problem. She had no bruises. She had nothing to show that he had been abusive to her. And so she went to his room one more time to tell her to leave him alone. I'm sorry, to tell him to leave her alone. And she didn't know he had a gun. And he had purchased the gun. This is Michigan. You could get a hunting rifle pretty easily, even back then. And the gun store owner had no legal obligation and obviously felt no moral obligation to tell the college that somebody using a college dormitory address had come and bought a gun there. If they had, the college told us they would have had reasonable cause to search his room and find the gun, which he purchased 10 days before he killed her. But my reaction to all this was, besides shock and horror and just anger at all the people and things that didn't stop this, including myself. I had information I did not realize. As I said, Maggie was a problem solver. She was sort of getting information, but she wasn't necessarily sharing it with all of us. But I wanted to get revenge. And because he had killed himself, there was the normal criminal justice solution to that was to take him to court and prosecute him and find him guilty of this horrendous crime. And then, he would not hurt anybody again. But that wasn't an option. So I was kind of, I wouldn't say obsessed by it, but I was certainly trying to figure this out, particularly because I know if it had been me, my niece would have done something in my honor and would have been fighting for some kind of, as we say today, justice and all of this. But I got the idea, I was Googling revenge and avenge on the internet one day, and I got this quote, living well is the best revenge. And I thought that's exactly what I'm seeking here, is that some sense that, yes, I can't do the traditional way to avenge her death, but that the one thing that he didn't want, I mean, he destroyed my niece. He wanted to destroy my family. He wanted to destroy me too. That was not going to happen. So I began to figure out, okay, what does that mean? What can I do? What good can come out of this situation? And so remember, I'm an attorney. I have litigated, and prior to this, I also, before Maggie was killed, did some work in state government doing public policy around human services and child welfare. But I didn't know how to run workshops or talk, work in groups or whatever. I'd done some victim advocacy. So I decided to do this workshop, and I called it Living Well. Based on the Living Well is the best revenge, I call it my Avenging Angel Workshops. And I had this idea, the word thrive was not being used that much back in the early 2000s, but I decided there had to be another word for the journey I wanted to be on. I didn't want to get stuck in my anger. And I know that women who had worked with previously, I got them out of the domestic violence situation. I got them beyond the crisis of the sexual assault through the work I had done. But, what's next? Because I wanted to know what was next. And so really that was the journey, that my own journey started to inform the work I wanted to do with other women. If I couldn't save Maggie, if she didn't have a chance to move on, then I wanted to give that chance to somebody else. And that's really what my work's been about. And so since about 2001, I have been doing a 2-day workshop that has been successful. And I measure that by the number of women who've told me so, because I always say, I can tell you what I do, but the women can really describe it better, that they have identified without any previous experience in this system, either the criminal justice or the family court system, that there's something missing, that there's a piece that's kind of the healing piece, kind of the moving on piece, kind of, I don't want to get stuck in my anger. I don't want to get stuck in the place that this situation has brought me to. And I don't want my children to get stuck there. Because for many children, in fact, one of the things I also did after Maggie was killed is I started working with male domestic violence offenders. I started doing psychoeducational groups with them. And with rare exception, when I asked the men in those groups if they had what their childhood was like, most of them talked about either witnessing domestic violence or being abused themselves. So we have this legacy that needs to be broken. And I think that's the journey from victim to survivor to thriver. And so that's what I do today.
It sounds like you do really amazing work. Are you comfortable with sharing with how your sister's healing journey? If you're not, it's okay.
Oh no, actually it was my brother's, it's my brother's stepdaughter. Maggie was my brother's stepdaughter. But we had met her when she was about 3 or 4 years old. So I'm from a Detroit Polish American family. And so one of the things my family always does, if you become part of my family, you're in my family. So we had, and my brother was very, very, obviously very close to my niece. So it's been a difficult journey. I think one of the things that people don't understand, and unfortunately we're getting more and more people who are having this experience, is what it means to be a survivor of homicide. And some people don't even understand, well, you didn't get killed, so why are you a survivor? No, I'm a survivor of someone who I loved, who was killed, and particularly, and I've met a lot of survivors of homicide over the last 20 years, a club that I did not want to join, but now that I'm here, and many of them have mentored me to say, you have to find something good to come out of this, and also that you will never really get over this. I mean, one of the things that in the survivor of homicide movement is some people are looking for closure. Some people are looking for, to forgive that person. And in fact, forgiveness is kind of the F word. Nobody wants to do that. Rarely do you see people who are capable of doing that. And it's hard.
It's really hard, really.
And
hard,
and it is that I live in Connecticut. Maggie and my brother's family and most of my extended family are in Michigan. So I used to see Maggie once a year pretty much. I mean, there's other times in the year, but definitely Christmas time. So every Christmas, every holiday, it always, where's Maggie? It's that sense that she's going to walk in the door and she's not going to do that. And how do you keep, feeling that grief and loss, but not getting lost in that grief and loss, because you can't. But it is continuous. I live in a state where Sandy Hook occurred, the shooting of the 6-year-old children in the school here, and the parents of those children every year, because it happened in early December, will talk about that, what it means. So I think it's as many people talk about the grieving process, to get to acceptance that this happened and you can't do much about it. What can you do that's good? And you'll see that in many, many, many survivors. In fact, right now, the anti-gun violence movement is pretty much being run by people who've either experienced school shootings or who are survivors and who know somebody who was in a school shooting. Particularly the Parkland high school students are really, really active. Yeah. So you find a cause, you move through it, and I think it's the word thrive, but then I also think the journey from victim to survivor to thriver is a non-linear journey, which means that, there's some days today I feel like a thriver because I'm talking to you and this is important and I want to get it across. But there are days that I can go back to victim and also survivor. I mean, it's not even about Maggie. It's like, my car breaks down and I'm a victim and oh my God. So I just go back to that. But the days that I can stay and I can, when I'm doing the workshops, when I'm working with the women, I can feel that I'm in the thriver place. And I keep developing what that feels like and, moving forward, trying to articulate it, not only for others, but for myself, because, there are days that I doubt that this is something that I have the strength to keep doing. But it's not so much being brave. It's just having the sense that I don't know what else to do. I don't want to get stuck back there. And I think so that I can role model for other women. And what I found in doing my 2-day workshop is that from the very beginning, I just didn't want to do a workshop. I wanted to have the women come to the workshop and then have a follow-up group. So over the 20 years, I now have this large thriver community of women. And because since COVID, we're now virtual, that they actually are women from all over the country and some parts of the world, actually. So that's the community that I go back to, and that's the community that we role model for each other. So if Susan can do that, then I can do the piece I'm doing. If a woman in my group can do something she thought she couldn't do, then I can. If she can do that, I can do this. So it's really that, because we're all on a journey. It's just a question of knowing where we are, how we're doing it, and how to keep us coming back to it.
Yeah, I imagine too the women feel great comfort in knowing that this is a personal issue for you, but also you have that professional experience and you have that law degree behind you. I'm sure they feel like they're in good hands when they work with you.
Well, it's kind of like a credibility issue. And for many, many years, I mean, many, many, many survivors work in the movement also. I mean, the battered women's shelters, the sexual assault crisis services, there are a lot of traumatized people that are working. So they're also realizing they have to find something good. And they do know, I mean, I don't have the personal experience of living in those kind of relationships or having those kind of assaults on my body. But I think the trauma that I've experienced and the post-traumatic stress has really been, clarifying for me that, yes, this is something, it's not just about me. It's not something I did bad, but it is the way the human body responds. And in the 20 years I've been doing this, there's been so much more information and articulation about what trauma can do, how trauma affects your body, how trauma, head injury, and strangulation can affect women short-term and long-term. Financial abuse, 99% of women who have come through domestic violence are also victims of financial abuse. The ability to reclaim that in their own lifetime is really difficult. And then I think the other piece that we're learning is that there's also, today there's research, and I've been following it particularly recently because I've been trying to articulate for people what I do. It's called post-traumatic growth, that there are opportunities in this process. And, you kind of get a little weird about it because it's like, well, I didn't want Maggie to die, but, because of her death, I'm now doing things that I don't think I'd ever would have done before. I don't think I would have gotten to this kind of work, although I really enjoy it and I embrace it. And it is something that I think I've actually always wanted to do, but I didn't have words for it. But but that's not the equation. I can't control what happened. I can control what I do next. And so I think many people, and you see it all over the place now, but even in COVID, people whose loved ones have passed away in COVID, things that have happened to them, they're that now working on something positive to come out of that. So we are a resilient society, which means we can bounce back. But post-traumatic growth means that you actually do more than bounce back. You must actually move yourself to I don't know if it's a higher level, more spiritual level. I don't know. I don't even know.
It's more active healing and more actively in charge of your healing. Yep.
Right.
And developing.
Right. And the words you use is heal, thrive, and dream. And that's one of the other things I help the women do is to bring out those dreams, the things that they always wanted to do since they were maybe little girls. I have a question that I ask in the workshop. One of the first day of the workshop is, if you had $10 million, and I think now we should make it $1 billion, but if you had $10 million and all the time you could work on something, what would you do? What dream would you bring up, and what would you do for yourself and the people around you? And the women are kind of taken aback by that. It's like, because they kind of forgot that they could actually now that they're out of an abusive relationship, although still dealing with the impact, or if they're moving beyond the crisis of a sexual assault, or many of the women that come into my workshop actually have had trauma histories from their child. So all that's compounded, but they're realizing there's some kind of freedom to this, and maybe they could start bringing those dreams out. And maybe it's a short-term goal, like I want to get back to school and finish my degree or work on a degree. And then I've got some other ideas about what I want to do with that degree. Or it could be, I've had women go back to school and get their master's degree. They're now running, they're CEOs of nonprofit organizations, women who weren't singing when I met them, and now they're singing again. So, whatever that dream is, or that thing that was interrupted by the crises of your life, whether you're 22 when I meet you, or you're 52 or 65, there's something that you could bring up and even to open you up, and then the next possibility and the next possibility. And I think to give them I use a motivational model. So not that they're not motivated to move on, but they're stuck somewhere. They don't have positive energy. Their inner critic is very loud. It's been fed by the abuser. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. Their desire is not focused enough. Yeah, they want to move on, but does that mean like a job? Let's talk. Is that a job? Okay, let's focus on the job. And then what's their fear that's holding them back? A limiting belief about themselves. So I can't get that job. I was rejected for a job 20 years ago, and now I'm going to get rejected again. So I'm not going to even try. No, let's see if we can break that down. And then finally, the other piece I try to help them with is, I call it the real you, the part of you that's been untouched by all that's ever happened to you. And they're kind of like, ooh, a part of me. So I felt like everything had been destroyed. It's like mind, body, and spirit had been, trounced on. And I said, no, it's a part of you, your values, things that you want to do, things that you feel are important to you. For me, it's meaningful work. If you give me, like, coming on this podcast, I can think about all the reasons why I shouldn't come on, and I'm not smart enough, and I'm going to say something stupid, but I love meaningful work, so this is meaningful for me. My information will get out. So I will do anything to jump over any hurdle, including making sure my Zoom account works today so I can get on. And that's what I teach the women. You're just stuck somewhere. It's not like you're stupid or you're not capable or you're not brave enough. Let's break it down. And when I do that, they can sort of see that there's something that, not that they're missing, but it's just a piece, and they can put those pieces together. The other thing that I do in my workshops is I don't have the women tell me their abuse story. I make sure they're safe. They're usually referred to me by a domestic violence crisis intervention program or a sexual assault center or a therapist or an attorney or word of mouth. But I first of all, I can't hear those stories anymore because I start to trigger. Every woman in the shelter is Maggie, and I can't deal with that. But secondly, they're kind of relieved that they don't have to tell it again, and that we're not starting from there. We're starting from another place. And
healing. Yep.
Right, of healing. And then the community knows that whenever we meet, this is where we start, and that it's always positive. And it's not like it's, like fake kind of positive, like fairy tale kind of positive, but really that you can come to a event. I usually have monthly group mentoring sessions for women who come through my workshop and feel positive and feel good when you leave and want to keep moving on and have been given some energy and some role modeling for how to do that.
Yeah, sounds beautiful. They're telling their story, has a place, and then once they get to you, it's like, okay, you've shared your story at least a few times between now and before you come through my door. Now we're looking at your future.
Right.
I think that's beautiful.
Right. Yeah, they really do like that. They think there's something like they should tell it again, but then they also realize that it's just going to trigger other people. So, and that process is really, I think, the first step is that's your past and you can't control that. There are things you need to keep doing because you're probably also involved in custody battles and, and financial issues, but it doesn't mean you have to get stuck there.
Yeah. I want to hear about the books that you have written, because I think it's all related to this too.
That's true. Well, the most common thing about me, which is actually not in my bio, but I've always been a writer. I've been a writer since I was a little girl. So, and I actually have a journalism degree as my bachelor's degree. So I had worked in journalism. I had worked as a reporter and also in public relations. But at some point, I really wanted my writing to be more advocacy, because journalism, you're supposed to be an objective observer. And I understand that. And I think that's a really good thing. But I wanted to be an advocate with my writing. And I always wanted to go to law school, although when I wanted to do that, there were very few women in law, and it was not a place where women were particularly welcome. But I got through it. I got the credential. So one of the things when I had started doing the workshop, probably for about 10 years, where I felt I had done like 4 workshops a year, and I had worked with this community that I pretty much knew what I had to offer and how I might put it together. So I actually have 2 series of books. One is a workbooks, which is the Thriver Zone series, I call it. So Entering the Thriver Zone is the first one, and that actually has what I call the 7 steps on the journey to thriving after abuse. And it's really from the workshop. It's the material it's the exercises that I use. The $10 million answer, for example, is in the 7 steps. So, seeing your journey, quieting the negative voice in your head, getting positive energy, visioning a new life, and setting goals. So that's the first book. And I have, in Entering, I actually had women from the program who've come through my workshop give me samples of what they've written in the workshop, so the person reading the book, the survivor, can understand it. And then the second book is called Staying in the Thriver Zone, because you can be introduced to it, but you need to how do you integrate it into your life? And that's the motivational model that I talked about: positive energy, focus, desire, overcoming fear, and then connecting with the real you. And once again, there's samples and whatever. So it's a workbook, but because libraries don't like lines in books, you really can't write in the book. But as I do in the workshop, we set up a separate journal that they can write in. And then the third book, called Living in the Thriver Zone, and I wrote these about 2 years apart. As I said in the beginning, the women tell the story better than I do about what this work is about and how the workshop impacted their lives and helped them. So I interviewed 7 women who've come through my program. Some of them were my very first workshops and have stayed in contact with me. And then I asked them, where were you and how did you feel about yourself and your future when you came into the workshop? What was about the workshop that helped you the most? And then talked about where they are today. How do they describe themselves as thriver? How do they describe themselves as living well? And it was really inspiring because I got the sense that a lot of the language that I use to describe it actually has come from them, which is really super. And then because I've been a nonfiction writer most of my life, journalism, and also I have some legal books out on sex discrimination for a number of years. I always wanted as a little girl to write a novel, and I didn't think I was smart enough to do that. And I didn't know, although I read books and went to the library and just read books, all kinds of novels, some of which were probably not age appropriate, but at the time, but the librarian kind of like, okay, you can read this book. So when Maggie was killed, I wanted to write something about her. I didn't think I could write a memoir about it, at least the scenario that was played out when she was killed. It was just too emotional. There was too much stuff. So I know that there is a technique in novel writing, which is called autobiographical fiction. So what the premise is, you sort of take something that happened to you and then using one of the tools that fiction writers use, which is the what if. So what if there's this young woman who was killed by her ex-boyfriend on this college campus, and what if this happened and that happened? And in particular, one of the cool things you can do in fiction, writing from that autobiographical position, is you could change the ending. So one of the things that we were not able to do in Maggie's situation, although my brother and sister-in-law certainly tried, was to make some major changes on the campus where Maggie was killed. And that was, we tried, and there were a few things, but it was, they didn't perceive it as something they wanted to do. So in my books, the young woman who's killed and her best friend takes on the challenge of changing the college. So the first book is called Awaken, the second one's Emerge, and the third is called Thrive, and they're set 10 years apart. So not only in the first book is set in 1999, the year Maggie was killed, the next one takes you 10 years later, where's all the characters, what's happening at the college, and then the book I just finished recently, 20 years later, Thrive, is 20 years later. And it was very healing for me. It was also just kind of fun to write. I mean, writing novels is really fun for me. And it also was, sometimes I think by story, people can learn things even better than if you read it like, didactically. So for example, in the first book, I talked about, similar to Maggie's, the kind of warning signs that were missed, not only by her, but by the people around her and the people around him actually too. And so, that's not like a brochure. It's good to have a warning sign list, but then you can see, oh yeah, that's something, you can sort of see it in somebody else's life. So I have been trying to articulate this as much as I can, either nonfiction or fiction. And also I'm trying now to take my materials into a kind of a train the trainer model, where I can start to train and integrate this work into programs where that piece is missing, and see.
That's awesome.
See how it would work.
Yeah. What are the names of your books on sexual harassment?
So I don't have any what do you call general public books out there. I've been writing it's called the Sex-Based Employment Discrimination book for about 30 years now for a legal publisher. So one of the things I wanted to do, particularly back when I was doing sexual harassment work in the 90s, as you mentioned in my bio, there was nothing out there. And in fact, when the Anita Hill congressional hearings came up, the one where the nomination of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, and she had a story to tell about him, about how he sexually harassed her when they worked together at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is kind of weird to imagine that there was suddenly this, and I'd been working before that. I think that was like in the late 80s or something. I can't remember exactly what year that was, maybe 89. And suddenly it was like this, all these attorneys who knew something about sex discrimination law, but this was a very specialized kind of work. And in fact, the Supreme Court wasn't until 1984 when they actually declared that sexual harassment was illegal under sex discrimination law. And many states started to put together and to understand that that was that kind of harassment, which has been going on for centuries with women in the workforce, was impeding them, was not giving them the opportunities that they were given under the law. Equal opportunity, no matter what your sex is, what your race is, what your religious background is. So really developing that law was important for me, and I haven't really done anything for the general public. There are some really good pieces out there, particularly from the Me Too movement and the work that Tarana Burke has done, which has just been exceptional. And her memoir is just exceptional.
Say the name again. I wonder if I read it.
Tarana Burke, T-A-R-A-N-A. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the name of the memoir. I'm not going to remember it, but it was.
Me neither, but I did read it. It was awesome.
It was awesome. She described her own personal experiences, and she described how she developed programming and then developed the organization. In fact, the Me Too, she was using that little hashtag. And then when one of the actresses who was the victim of Harvey Weinstein picked it up like overnight, suddenly her social media was bombarded with all these women like, me too, me too. And it really just catapulted that piece forward to allow more women to feel. And in fact, the case that's now going on with E. Jean Carroll, the one who's accusing the former president of sexually assaulting her, she said that the Me Too movement gave her the courage to come forward. So all those kind of things have been a piece of the work I've done, although I haven't really specialized. I don't practice law anymore in the traditional sense. One of those people like, I used to be a lawyer and now I do this, but it's something that I've really enjoyed. And I've always felt where I started this work actually was back in the early women's movement when I thought one of the key pieces about discrimination against women was the ability to get jobs and get good jobs and get good pay. And now 40 years later, we're getting there. I mean, we're getting to the place where
baby
women
steps.
well, we have a woman vice president, and we haven't got a woman president yet, but that's coming. But the idea that this is where women can be and fighting against that sexism. And I think even doing domestic violence work. I mean, when I was doing work with the offenders, I mean, these men were and they were young men. They weren't like, 40, 50 or 80 years old in some other century. They were men who were being socialized today to say that, they were the king of the castle and women should be submissive. And it wasn't all of them, but, there's still this strain, and there's still a lot of people, a lot of men who have that position, a lot of women who are still really struggling with that. But there are many more, particularly young women, who, and one of the things that they've been clearer about is that they make more money, or at least as much as men do, then they have more options as to what they want to do with their personal life. Will they get married? Do they have to get married? For many years, my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, marriage was the only way you could be economically safe. And I always say to people these days, and I just realized this recently, my mother was born the year 1919. Women got the right to vote in this country. So that's how close we are to this revolution. My mother's lifetime, not my grandmother's lifetime, not my great-grandmother's lifetime, my mother's lifetime. So we really are almost still on the cutting edge. And there's so many other ways that we're trying to move women forward. Sorry, that's my women's right.
I love it. 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 Yeah. You have so many nuggets in this podcast episode that is going to appeal to women of different decades.
Yes.
Like your message is really for all women. So I think that's even your bio, you're like in the 70s, I did this, the 80s, I did this, the 90s, So that was really
that is how the women's movement has worked. I mean, and not that it was a plan, because I remember sitting in rooms, 40 years ago when none of us had a plan. We were just like, oh, there's something wrong here. We got to go fix it. But it is really still an open book as to how we can, deal with some of the issues that have been persistent. We've made, particularly in the law, we've made these little incremental, it now says sexual harassment is illegal and equal pay is, the standard, and no matter what your sexual orientation, but then those are just laws that need to be enforced and have the society agree those are our standards, those are our values. And we, as I remember from consciousness raising rap groups years ago, that we all recognize, women are the majority in this world. I mean, so it should be majority rule. There's something that, if anything, that gave us in sheer numbers, that's still true. But it is true that young women today have a lot more options, but there's still things we have to work on.
So the women let's pretend there's one woman right now listening to this show, and she's feeling pretty demoralized. What would be your best piece of advice or recommendation for her to not feel that way anymore?
Well, I think one of the first revelations that the women experience and they come into my workshop, actually, it's the first step, the first of the 7 steps. I call it See Your Journey. I have women who come into my workshop and I have them tell me a favorite children's story, which sort of illuminates the journey. Most stories, I'm a Cinderella girl. Most stories start with a struggle. Something's happened, something bad has happened, death or destruction, or, the wicked witches come and grab the kids, Hansel and Gretel. And then a moment of transformation in Cinderella, the fairy godmother shows up and the rags become the beautiful gown. And then there's the happy ending, which, today the younger women don't like this happy ending thing, but I like to think about it as a movement to the next step. And so that struggle to transformation to happy ending, we're all in a journey. And many of the women who come in, and so I label the struggle as the victim stage, the transformation as a survivor stage. Oh my God, I did survive this. This is like transformational. And then the thriver place, which is like, I'm going to go follow my dreams. I'm going to go, I can do this.
I love that.
That many of the women who, when I put this on the board, or now I'm doing virtual Zoom sessions, I put it on the whiteboard. They're like, I didn't know I was on a journey. I mean, no one ever told me I was on a journey. I mean, why didn't they tell me that? And then they realize that what they've been doing is going back and forth between victim and survivor their whole life. Childhood abuse, sexual assault as a teenager, sexual harassment. And they've just been going back and forth. And they say to me, I'm a really good survivor. I can survive anything. And I say, that's amazing. That's great. I'm so glad you can do that. But you're spending a lot of energy going back and forth. Let's see if we can take that energy and move it over there. And I think that's the piece that begins them. And then they're like excited, like, okay, how am I going to do that? And so I think I think more women are actually feeling that without even someone like me doing the descriptive mapping of the journey. They're kind of like coming out of this situation where they finally are free from the person who's been abusing them or beyond the sexual assault, and say, so what's next? I want to move on, And I think today there are more women like Oprah. Maya Angelou was one of them, who, it's still a stigma to identify yourself as a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, but there are more that are coming out, like Tarana Burr. And so we now have these role models, and Oprah was really, if you ever watched the Oprah show, she'd always bring women on talking about their journey. They didn't always have those words, but there are always these positive women, and here's what I'm doing. And she'd ask the question, like, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? What'd you do?
It's very empowering. Yeah.
Right. So I think if you can get that energy, and then, it may be the work I do, it may be another book, it may be a movie, something that makes you realize that. And if you can, I always say, if you're a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault, and you've gotten through that experience, you can do about anything. So how did you do that?
That's true.
Break it down a little bit. And I think I also am doing my workshops virtually. So they're free of charge. They've always been free of charge. I've been very clear about that. This is not something that that you have to, I know women who come out of domestic violence for years and they don't have money. They just don't. Even if they have money someplace, they don't have access to it. So I run them free of charge. If you go on to myavengingangel.com, which is one of my websites. There's information about my upcoming workshops. And my books are also available on the larger website, which is called thriverzone.com. So, and however you come to this information, maybe it's not through my explanation, my sort of model, but I think there's more and more people that are, gravitating towards it and also finding ways they can heal.
Beautiful. Yeah. So how do you make a living if you're not charging for your workshops?
Well, that is an interesting question. My mother would have asked that question if she was still alive. So one of the things that I have done, I have a nonprofit organization that has supported me, and they've raised money. I don't qualify for domestic violence or sexual assault crisis services, so I don't do that. I don't qualify for funding, like federal funding, but there are a number of foundations, a couple here in Connecticut, that are looking at empowerment issues, and sometimes they define them very broadly. People who need to be empowered, and usually women are in that category because women tend to be more poor than men do. But they haven't always identified the subgroup of women who've been victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So I point that out to them, and they've given me money, but it has been a struggle. And one of the things that I want to do is I think there is funding out there. What I do is prevention, or maybe even an intervention. The women that I have come through my workshop and have stayed in my Thriver community that I have been in contact with, they do not go back. So that means that it's a return on the investment. And many of the women who I talk to who work in these programs say, yeah, these women do come back, not their fault, or they see their grown children, 20 years later coming through. And so we really haven't figured out a way to prevent that from happening. And that's prevention, maybe not primary prevention. We're not preventing them from getting into a relationship like that in the first place, but we are getting them out, and we're allowing them to see that there's a path forward. So I think as we talk more and as a country, people start to realize these are the kind of interventions we want, then perhaps some money will flow. And that's what I want to do now, is sort of move what I do, the model I have, the motivational model I have, into programs and find that kind of funding and get enough of them operating to see what works and how it integrates. I'm not getting any younger, so I know I have to I love doing what I do. I think it's one of the most amazing things to watch. Literally, I sometimes see the women actually transform in front of my eyes. And sometimes it's even like an hour into the workshop and you can just see,
light bulbs.
Yeah, and the depression is kind of like falling away and they're like, oh my God, oh my God. So I do think it's the way of the future. We just got to sort of get people into a space where they can see the value of it, and that it will, prevention programs have always been difficult to sell, but the more people understand, you can either spend the money in the place where they've been victimized or the place where they're now moving on. And I think that's really what, not only myself, but there's a number of people that are understanding that and hopefully funding it. So, but in the meantime, yes, I was very clear about the workshops being free of charge. And I'm also very clear that I don't want my materials to go someplace where people will charge women for it. So, trying to hold on to that and have it as accessible as possible to as many women. But I think we're getting there. I think, people are understanding that this is the place we need to go.
So do you have women all over the country since you have it virtual attend?
Yeah. Since
what
COVID,
about globally?
I've had a couple women from other countries, who've come on. We've also had a number of women from other countries or people from other countries who are running programs, the crisis intervention programs, that are very interested in my work. I've had a lot of interest in translating into Spanish. I'm not Spanish speaking. And also trying to get the information into some kind of a training platform so it's very accessible. And I'm not the only person who's figured this out or has material, but I think it'd be great to begin to share that kind of information and particularly the kind of setting where this most be, for example, I do have a number of therapists that send women to me, because therapists, although they could do visioning and goal setting, don't usually do that, at least not initially with a trauma survivor. There's so much other material, other places they need to go. So when the women come back to therapy, the therapist is like, this is great. Because they could feel the energy started to move. So I do have therapists that have also been interested in my work, and some of the exercises I use. And there's also been men who've been interested in what I do, male victims of sexual assault, particularly. I've also been to men's prisons where a number of the men there have trauma histories. They did bad things and they got themselves there for doing bad things, but their trauma history as children and adolescents and teens and getting into gangs, you can really see where the social problems of the world have not been solved. And these men are men and women, but in this case, men are filling up the jails, and the mental health issues that are there and the trauma issues that are there. We just got a lot of work to do.
There's a lot of work to be done. Yes. We need to clone ourselves, right?
Yeah, right. Like, can we just make more Zoom little things, little squares?
So I really have loved our talk. I have to wrap up because I have another podcast guest coming. But if someone really is listening and think, oh my God, Susan Omilian, yeah, I just really want to be in her workshop, is the best way to find you?
Yes. So if they go to myavengingangel.com, which is the name of my workshop, there's a phone number they can call. There's a date there. There's a flyer. And there's also an online registration if they feel comfortable. They can also reach me at my website, which is Thriverzone, the larger website. And my email is susan@thriverzone.com. So, and it may be either women who are survivors themselves or people who are working with survivors. I'd love to hear from them. That'd be great.
Awesome. Susan, I really hope you stay in touch with me. I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
You're doing phenomenal work. We need more of you in the world. Thanks for being here.
Right, and I love your title, Heal, Thrive, and Dream. That's just wraps it all. That's it. That's the whole thing. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.